On this week's episode of the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I'm interviewing Mike Mansfield, the CEO of Charlotte County Habitat for Humanity. He's been CEO for 18 years, but prior to that, he was in the private sector, which you're going to hear about. Under his leadership, Charlotte County Habitat's gone from averaging 4 houses per year to 30 houses, and I know in some years they have quite exceeded that. Mike has served on any number of boards on the state chapter of Habitat for Humanity, and just what a contributor to his community and to organizations. He's always a resource for CEOs in his community. So please, I hope you enjoy this interview with Mike Mansfield. Hey, did you know that we have a YouTube channel with all these podcasts and video? You get to see what's going on, what we look like when we're doing these podcasts. So if you'd like to go take a look, it's youtube.com/@thecorley-company. We'll see you there. Mike, take some time, introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your career and how you came to become CEO for Charlotte County Habitat.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning. And it's been a journey for sure. And I started off in Massachusetts. I lived there for 38 years, was raised in a small town, 5th generation Mansfield in the same house, believe it or not. And got married, had a couple of children, and one of my sons is autistic, and we had to move because of his autism to find some schooling, and we ended up moving to Florida, and which was a great move for us. We loved it down here. We used to vacation here, and we said, well, if we're going to have struggles, we might as well struggle in the sun. So that's how we ended up in Florida, and I went to work for a company called Lesco, which is it's a big fertilizer company and professional turf product company. Worked there for about a year and a half. Wasn't extremely happy doing what I was doing. Felt like I needed more. I wasn't giving of myself back to the community, and I wanted some more out of life, really. So I found Habitat. A friend of mine said you should interview with Habitat, and I went to work at Lee County Habitat, and then was there 4.5 years, and then came up to Charlotte County for the last 18 years. So been 22 years with Habitat. My family's grown. This is home to them now. So even though my home was still in Massachusetts, my boy's home is here. So
yeah, well, as your accent will indicate, and people will probably pick up on it every now and then. It gets thicker, it comes in and out. I've noticed that with you. You can't get rid of that Massachusetts accent. But it's interesting. So you've had a career before the nonprofit space. You were in the for-profit world, and you touched on one of your jobs, but you also owned a business. I'm just curious, your experience, the difference between leading a nonprofit and being involved leading a for-profit business.
Yeah, it is quite a bit different, actually. You do things, you think you do things the same way, but I would say the biggest difference that I saw and figured out very quickly is there's a lot more moving parts in a nonprofit. So as you stated, I had my own business for almost 20 years before moving to Florida. And I was able to call the shots. I answered to myself. I didn't have to go to a committee, a board. Every once in a while I would ask friends and mentors for advice, but really I was my own person and chief cook and bottle washer, if you will. When you go into the nonprofit world, you find out you're answering, believe it or not, to your clients, your board of directors. There's volunteers involved, donors involved, committee members involved, community members involved. And you are trying to, one, get all those people on board with you and your mission to see it move forward and see how much impact that you can make in the community. And two, how do you recruit as many of those people to try to help you do what you do? So I think that the two big differences are you're able to operate more independently on your own as a business owner, or even when I was hired to be the heads of other businesses, I was really answering to myself or one other person. This way, you're answering to a lot of other people.
That's fascinating. So much more challenging. So did you have a leadership philosophy, and how might it have evolved over the years?
Yeah, and I think my leadership philosophy has always been I was a basketball player in high school, and I was a late bloomer. I didn't start until I was a junior in high school, and I really loved the game of basketball. It was a short run for me as far as my talent would take me. So I immediately got into coaching, and as soon as I graduated from high school, I started coaching 10 to 12-year-olds. And then I did that and then took on JV role at high school and then got promoted to varsity head coach. And so I think my leadership kind of stuck out that way, that it was a team philosophy. Basketball is a team sport. It's a team philosophy, and it takes a lot of people to accomplish one common goal. And I really try to carry that through my work world and then into the nonprofit world. But also to try to mentor people. As a basketball coach, you're a mentor. I liked my favorite students to coach was the 10 to 12-year-olds because they were little sponges and they would just absorb everything that you said. And I just thought they were the most impressionable. They learned the most. They had the largest gains of anybody that I ever coached. So I enjoyed that probably the most. And I think a lot of my nonprofit work has been like that as well. I'm a believer of improving people's lives as they move forward. And I like to promote from within. So I like to try to mentor people and work closely with them to build confidence so that they can become leaders of their own. So if we're all swimming in the same direction and we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, I think you have a really good organization.
And part of building a team and developing and growing people is the ability to delegate. So I'm curious, back you're running your business, which you said goes, and that's, I guess, some form of delegation, but as a nonprofit, just the breadth of things that you have to accomplish. How did you learn to delegate, and do you have an approach to delegation?
Well, I think my approach to delegation, and I would say the most important thing that I could pass on to anybody else would be prioritization. If you can't prioritize, you're going to have a really hard time delegating. You're going to have a hard time running an organization or leading any kind of, whether it's a team, whether it's a business, a nonprofit, for-profit. You have to be able to prioritize and be really good at that. And I think by teaching and mentoring, you'll hear me say that a few times, that you're teaching and mentoring others to do like what you do and try to make good decisions and prioritize. I think delegation is something that you have to be steadfast at. Some people, and I've seen it a lot, both in the for-profit and nonprofit world, they're going to take what I call the easy way out, right? So they're going to say, it's just easier if I do it myself than if I ask Michael to do this, or if I have to teach him and show him and mentor him to get that way. But what people are doing is they're really short selling themselves, because yeah, you might have solved that one problem quickly that one time, but now Michael still isn't able to make those decisions, make that prioritization, and help you in the future. If you invest that time early on, now you've grown him as an individual, and then you can continue on as that person grows, your business grows, your nonprofit grows, and you can accomplish much more.
Yeah, well stated. And another aspect of being a leader is communication. We always hear that's the bane of every organization, right? The communication or lack thereof. But as CEO, your job is to ensure streamlined or effective communication across the organization. What has been your approach? Just talk a little bit about that and share the ways that you've tried to ensure that type of communication.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite things. When I first took on the job here 18 years ago, I sat down in the conference room and brought in all the staff and directors, and I said, there's the three main things that I believe will help run a good organization. It's communication, communication, and communication. And they all laughed at me like you did. And I said, I can't understate it enough, or overstated, I should say, enough, that people take it for granted sometimes. I think some people don't even understand what communication is. I think there's a lot of people, there's communication, then there's information. A lot of times people don't take the time, and this is, I think, something that I've grown better at and learned more, is to try to find out how people like to communicate. So there's, as you know, many, many different ways to communicate. And if someone's preference of communication happens to be text instead of email, or they want an in-person conversation, or pick up the phone, or whatever that happens to be, that is how you should try to communicate. And it's not the same. If I'm a leader and I say, I am only going to communicate via text or email or phone, then you've shut off half your staff, and now you have silos everywhere. And I try to instill that to the rest of the staff. So we all have preferences, right? We all have our go-to, what we like, what we feel most comfortable with. But I think to have that broad array of communication skills, and that you're consciously using that when you try to reach out to others. And it's not just staff. I talk about staff, but with the nonprofit world and all those moving parts, how I communicate with our donors, with volunteers, how I work with people in the community. There's different modes of communication that you have to work in to your repertoire, I think, to be able to be successful.
Well, and what I'm hearing you saying is you got to be humble as a leader and say, you know what, I'm going to deliver a message in a manner that they want to hear it in. It'd be easy from sit on high and say, I'm just going to send emails, but that, like you said, that cuts off half your audience. So I commend you for that, and the recognition that we as leaders need to do whatever makes the most sense to be heard. Now, you inherited a board. And you've managed, I use it in quotes because, no CEO manages their board, but we all know the CEO manages the board. So and that could be quite a challenge. So can you just talk a little bit about your approach with recruiting board members, managing board members, engaging board members? How's it worked for you over the years?
Ooh, this is a big one, right? So you're talking about, so in the for-profit world, it would be like, how do I manage my boss, right? So
right.
your board is your boss, right? So I've had 10 presidents over the 18 years that I've been here. So I've had 10 people, and the first thing that I do with each president when they become president, so first I get hired and there's a president. I go to them and I said, okay, how do you want to communicate, right? So, which we just talked about. Second, what's the best way for me to communicate with you? How do you like text? Do you like phone calls? Do you like emails? How do you want in-person meeting? I know we have a board meeting, we have an executive meeting, we have a finance meeting. Do you want to have separate meetings with me? Do you want to have impromptu meetings? Do you want to have a set meeting every month? And it's been all over the gamut. I've had presidents that said, every third Wednesday I want to have coffee and toast at IHOP at 6:30 in the morning in Murdoch. Okay, that's so be it. And that's the way that it was with that president. It worked with them. We had good communication. I have others that are like, yep, call me when you need me. So, again, establishing the communication, I think, is first and foremost. When I adopted a board, as you said, Michael, I think things are different. So, you have people that are on the board. Some are very active, some are not very active. And it's like the 90-10 rule, right? So 10% of the people do 90% of the work. So, I know that obviously varies with different organizations. So what you want to do is you want to try to find the passion in the board members on how they feel they can contribute most to the organization. And I'll use a really good example. One of my favorite phrases is "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." I had a board member that was on the board. I was hired back in 2007. We did a board retreat, and shortly after that, he says, "I think I'm going to leave the board." And I said, "Geez, why? I've just got to know you. I think you have a lot to contribute." And he said, I really, board meetings aren't my thing. I don't feel like I'm giving what I came here to do to the board. And if it's just going to be monthly board meetings, I just don't think that's for me. So I got to know him a little bit, and he was a realtor, local realtor, and habitat, real estate. We need property to build on. And I'm like, we don't have a land acquisition committee. Would you like to chair our land acquisition committee? And then you can report to the board how land acquisition goes. You can help us with that. And he's like, oh my God, that would be great. Like, that's my wheelhouse. I know what to do. He's been an amazing board member since. Huge contributor. Helps me a ton. We've done some, well, in the 18 years that I've been here, we've provided home ownership opportunities for 500 families. So you figure 500 lots of property, and we build on individual lots, not on tracts of land. So that's a lot of moving parts as far as land and acquisition going in and then sales going out. If I didn't have somebody like that with their expertise, it would be impossible for me to try to do that. So that's just one example of how I look at working with board members. So going back to I will call the downside of it, there's board members that how do you move somebody off the board if they're not really a fit for the board, if they're not contributing? And I don't mean contributing financially, I mean contributing to the organization in any manner. So a lot of times their term will end and we'll thank them for their service, so we won't ask them if they want to re-up. So I think that's kind of an easier, smooth way to try to move somebody off a board. As far as recruiting for new board members, it was quite a few years back. It was a little bit all over the place for our affiliate. And I didn't like the process. Now we have a nominating committee, but every person that serves on our board has to serve in committee work first. So it's kind of like try it before you buy it. But it works because you get feedback from different staff members, other board members, other committee members that, hey, this person's really doing a great job in the finance committee, in the family selection committee, in the development committee. There's somebody that's showing a tremendous amount of passion. They would be really great for Habitat to serve on the board. Then we'll have conversation. Do you have any interest in serving on the board? Then we'll meet usually with the board president for lunch, do an interview, and then they'll get proposed to the board for selection. So I think trying to keep, so once you get to that point, now you have an engaged board, right? So now let's say 90% of the people are active and only 10% are not active. That's really the numbers. Now you flip the switch and you really wanted to get into that. So how do you maintain that? So everybody has burnout. Everybody goes through phases, right? Some people just like, okay, it's time for a change. I want to go on to a different board. I want to serve in a different capacity, and that's fine. We also have term limits that are going to prevent people. But what you want to do is make sure you're finding something that is keeping people engaged with your mission. So not just contributing financially, not just coming out and volunteering, banging a few nails, or coming to a home dedication, or going to one of our events, but really contributing. And then they feel engaged at those board meetings and they're not boring. And yes, you're going over financials and a lot of the business end of things, but they still feel the mission part of what you're doing in what they're doing. And that is extremely important to have an engaged board.
Well, I hope every executive director, CEO goes back, replays this, because that was masterful. And just share a little bit how often, the frequency of communication, your board chair, the board itself, committees, how much time does it take for you in a given month? How do you make sure that everybody is aligned?
Yeah, so we went to, it's interesting, this was a nice little transition, I think, for us. When I first got here, we had executive meetings monthly, board meetings monthly, finance meetings monthly. And as I progressed here and I would say the affiliate grew, it became evident that the executive meetings were just mirroring the board meetings. So you had basically, say, 6 people on the executive committee that were really making all the decisions, and then you brought it to a board of 12 to 15 people, and they were just rubber stamping everything the executive committee. So that is your quickest way to lose interaction with your board members, right? Because they know they're going to go to a board meeting and somebody else has really already vetted this situation out. You're just putting the stamp on it of approval and you're done. And you really don't feel like you're active part of that board. So we reduced executive to quarterly. And then, and if we have to meet in between because there might be a legal issue or something like that, we'll call a special meeting, but that doesn't happen all that often. So what we found out is we got a much more engaged board that way. So as far as my interaction with board members, I would say weekly, I'm probably talking to at least 2 to 5 board members. We currently have 12. We've had up to 15 before. Our charter lets us, our charter lets us go to 21, I would say. But I don't see us getting to that many, but we can go to that many in our bylaws. But the management part isn't bad. Again, the meeting with the presidents has been all over the place. I've had as much as 1 extra meeting a month for an hour or so with different board presidents, but I typically see the board president at least once a week. We have a rule here for check signing. Anything over $10,000 requires 2 signatures. And one has to be somebody who's not in the building or an officer of the corporation. So there's only 2 people that have signing ability here at Habitat, me and Kelly. So we if I'm not here for some reason, she can sign the check run. Anything that's a double signature, I can sign it. But then typically either our board president is the second signature, treasurer, or secretary. So I try to make it the president. That way, at least I'm keeping in contact on a regular basis. And again, that might only be for 5 to 10 minutes a week. So again, and then I do have some board members, board presidents, they assume the role as presidents. They want to take that once a month, sit down with me privately and talk and, hey, how are things going? Where do you see us moving to? But I would say about 40% of the presidents have wanted it that direction. I would say 60% are more with the touch once a week, just to see how things are going. Don't need to spend a lot of time. And again, as I've aged or matured in the role, I would say, there's more trust built up there, and there's probably a little bit less as far as wanting to meet on a 1 hour per month basis.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense as you mature in the role. So as we starting to close out this podcast interview, so looking back, what as a leader, what have been some of the most rewarding things about being a leader, and maybe some of the most challenging things? So 2 questions.
Yeah, I think rewarding wise for me, and like I said, I have a 22-year career with Habitat, 18 at the helm here in Charlotte County. I would say the most rewarding thing for me is the people, is been really working with the different people, the people I've met through the journey, as they call it. And, and it runs the gamut. It's not just staff people, it's volunteers, donors, homeowners. I remember a long time ago, somebody saying we used to get the newspaper when people got newspapers, right? They would come out and cover our dedications, and all of a sudden they stopped covering them for a while. And I'd call the newspaper and I said, hey, did we do something wrong? How can we get you guys back out there? And they're like, well, it's another Habitat dedication. They're all the same. And I said, I beg to differ. I said, I've done 1,000 of these, and no 2 are alike to me. Everybody comes from a different walk of life. Yeah, the end result is the same. You're helping a low-income family get into a house, but their story is really what matters. And so that to me has been super gratifying, is seeing where people have come from and where they ended up. And especially folks that just thought this was never going to be for them. They would never have a home to raise their family. They would never be able to do this. And then to see where they are today, and kids growing up and coming back in the office to see me, that's probably been, to me, the most gratifying. Challenging, I would say we all tend to remember what happens last in your life, not what happens early on in your life, right? So, the disasters recently have been a super challenge, and I would talk about COVID as being a disaster, right?
Sure.
Some people don't categorize it as that. I did. In my 62 years on the planet, I don't remember anyone telling me that I can't leave my house, So to me, that's a disaster. That's worse than a hurricane. Hurricane goes by and then I go out the next day, right? Or a half hour afterwards. The COVID pandemic was extremely difficult to work through as a leader. And I'll say, for a couple of reasons. One is we talked earlier on the podcast about communication and information. The information and communication we were getting was all over the board. There's rules about masks. Who do you listen to? Do you listen to the state, the local government, the federal government? There were so many different things. So I think as a leader, what we did was we chose early on a couple of things. As I went to the board and I said, I think that people are scared and they're panicked and they don't know what to do. I think as a board, we need to go out and tell our staff, no matter what happens, you're going to get a paycheck for 2 months. This was before the paycheck thing came out from the government. And we went out and we addressed our staff immediately. And we said, we don't know what's going on, just like you don't know what's going on. But you don't have to worry where your next meal's coming from, because you're going to get a paycheck. If you have to stay home, if we decide to work from home, what we're going to do. So again, communicating out to the staff quickly, letting them know. I think there was huge, peace of mind. Everybody was like, oh, okay, that's one thing I don't have to worry about. Going through stuff like that, I think, was probably the most challenging for me. Hurricanes, I hate to say, we've become pretty good at it. Not something we've wanted to get good at, but that is a little bit easier for us, I think, to handle. For me as a leader, we have protocols that are set up. We follow the protocols. We get on the other side of it fairly quickly. The devastation, it just matters, as you know, where it hits, right? So you guys got the brunt of it last time up in the Sarasota community. We got a little bit less. Back in Ian, we got a lot more. You guys got a little bit less. So you can't really plan on it. What you can plan on is how you're going to recover after. And I think doing a good job with that. But that has probably been the most difficult. And I think COVID, it changed the workplace. I think it, for a while, it forced everybody out of brick and mortar buildings. I think we've seen over the last few years a lot of people going back to brick and mortar, going back to the office space. There's value in interaction with staff and things like that. We had a little bit of both. We had some hybrid for a while. I would say we're 100% back in office now, and I think that is healthier for our organization. But that was a challenge. It was certainly a challenge.
Oh, absolutely. So 18 years as a leader. Looking back, young Mike Mansfield walks into the office. You want to give him advice, or any new or current CEO, executive director of a nonprofit? What advice would you like to share with them, Mike?
I think two things. I think one is be yourself. I've never tried to be somebody I'm not, and I'm not the most polished guy. I never professed to be, but I do think I'm a good leader. I think that just a couple of examples that I've given earlier, that's sort of what has happened to me my whole life. I joined an organization. Next thing you know, I'm the president. I was joking with a gal that's a president-elect for Rotary in my office here today. I said, yeah, I've been president of 3 different Rotary clubs because I've moved, and and they're like, oh my God, I hope not the same club. And I like, no, they're different. But, I think be yourself, and, people recognize and they see that what you have to offer and what you can bring to an organization is really good advice. And I think the second thing that it took me a while to learn, and I think that was from what was earlier in the podcast, me talking about, I worked for myself. I answered to myself. And when I first came in to the nonprofit world, I didn't utilize the skills around me as well as I could have. And I think if there's any really great advice I could give somebody is utilize. I always say surround yourself with great people. Use the great people's advice that are around you. So that is something that I would give to people. Do that early on. Do it often, because there are so many great people that they may not work for you. They may be on committees. They may just be a mentor to you as a friend in the community. Utilize what they have to say. Ask them for their opinions. It's super helpful.
Wonderful advice. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Mansfield, CEO of Charlotte County Habitat for Humanity. Mike, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Michael. It's been great knowing you over the last 10 plus years, and I'm honored that you asked me to speak today.
Thanks, Mike. And we have had some fun together, so I've enjoyed knowing you. Thank you much, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. Great interview with Mike Mansfield. A lot of nuggets there, Reed. I don't know how you're going to limit it to 3, but we're counting on you. Recapping with Reed, give us 3.
Yep. So my first takeaway is about delegating in leadership. And I like the way that Mike framed it. Delegation it's basically an investment in the future. If you are able to delegate and teach people how to do tasks, they are able to do this in the future, so you don't have to.
Well stated. Number 2.
When it comes to communication, Mike has said he has 10 different board chairs over the course of his time there, and he would always go to them and figure out what form of communication they like the best and then work in that framework. He also does that with all of his different stakeholders as well. Meet people where they are with communication.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize that. And number 3,
I liked their good financial stewardship, I think is the way that you might say that. And for any checks that are over $10,000, it takes 2 people to sign, and one of them cannot be somebody that's in the building, which is just good stewardship. We've heard horror stories about fraud happening and money getting taken from nonprofits, and that is just a great way to make sure that does not happen.
Yeah, those great controls in place. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Recapping with Reed from our discussion with Mike Mansfield. And you know how we end this. We will I-501 see you next week.